Floor. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it is a choice for him to implement extremist policies that have taken the lives of 2,500 British Columbians every single year. Since the NDP has asked him to reverse course on his and formerly their radical policy, 22 British Columbians have died of drug overdoses. But he continues to allow those drugs to kill the people in our hospitals and on our public transit. When will we put an end to this wacko policy by this wacko Prime Minister?
No. That is not there are a couple of things which are going on here today which is not acceptable. And I ask all members, please, to keep themselves, to control themselves. I'm going to ask two things. One, I'm going to ask the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to withdraw that term, which is not considered parliamentary.
Mr. Speaker, I replace wacko with extremist. He is an
The Honourable Member to please. I'm going to ask the Leader of the Opposition once again to just withdraw that comment, please. And I'll invite the Honourable Member. I'm going to ask the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to please withdraw that comment and simply withdraw that comment.
I'll replace it with radical leftist policy.
I am not asking to replace. I'm asking the Honourable Member to just simply withdraw.
Mr. Speaker, I replace the word wacko with extremist.
I'm going to ask the Honourable Leader of the Opposition one last time to please withdraw that comment and simply withdraw that comment.
I simply withdraw and replace with the aforementioned adjective.
Mr. Poilievre, I have to name you for disregarding the authority of the chair. Pursuant to the authority granted to me by Standing Order 11, I order you to withdraw from the House and from any participation by video conference for the remainder of this day's sitting. C'est une journée exceptionnelle.
Well, today is a very unique day. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The NDP Liberal Prime Minister has implemented a wacko and radical drug decriminalization and handout program. He's literally handed out tax-funded opioids. The result has been tragic, a nearly tripling in the number of overdose deaths, and where the policy has been most deeply implemented in BC, a 300% increase in overdose deaths. Prime Minister did a last-minute reversal on decriminalization in that province, only to vote back in favor of decriminalization yesterday. Isn't it his plan to decriminalize across Canada if he's re-elected?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the fact is we will continue to be there responsibly on a science-based, evidence-based approach that works with jurisdictions on the tools they need to counter the growing opioid and toxic drug epidemic. I understand the ideological desire by Conservatives to simply look at every problem as if it's a nail because all they have is a hammer. We're going to continue to be there investing in community supports. We're going to be there to continue to work with jurisdictions who want to help people struggling with addictions, and we will continue to be there to ground in science and evidence.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Imagine you're a young couple in a hospital welcoming your newborn into the world, and all of a sudden you smell meth or crack smoke coming down the hallway. That was the reality up until just a few weeks ago in British Columbia, when because the Prime Minister and the NDP had decriminalized crack. And if those parents had asked the nurse to stop it, they would have said, no, that can't happen. These drug uses are now legal. We're introducing the Safe Hospitals Act to ban all hard drugs from hospitals. Will the Prime Minister support it? Yes or no?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, to be clear, those things are already illegal in hospitals. We know that nurses and hospital staff need to feel safe in their work environment, and it's our government that has invested billions of dollars into the healthcare system to ensure Canadians have access to the best care possible, and support goes to our frontline health workers. The important difference between the Conservative Party and us is that while they look to criminalize the most vulnerable struggling with addictions, we are rolling up our sleeves and working with all levels of government to put an end to this crisis and help these most vulnerable Canadians.
Just common sense Conservatives who are saying that the Prime Minister's latest tax hike on small businesses, farmers, home builders, and healthcare is not worth the cost. Now, former Liberal Treasury Board President Scott Bryson says the Prime Minister's support for the tax hike is a combination of moral sanctimony and economic complacency from ministers who simply do what PMO tells them. Right. He calls it socialist bafflegab. Right. Why is the Prime Minister going ahead with killing jobs and raising costs with what his own Liberals call socialist bafflegab?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, despite the Conservative leader's partisan attacks, the raise on capital gains inclusion rates is very simple. If Canadians make more than $250,000 in profit from selling investments in a given year, we're asking them to share a little more of those profits with Canadians who need those investments, whether it's by investing in housing, whether it's standing up for school food programs, whether it's delivering dental care to seniors. These are investments we're making to support Canadians by asking the wealthiest to pay their fair share.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
It's not partisanship for me. It's his own former Liberal Treasury Board president who calls it socialist bafflegab. In fact, the tax begins applying on the very first dollar that a small business earns. And, you know, he's been promising that raising taxes would make life fair. We find out today from the Food Banks Association of Canada that now a record-smashing 25% of Canadians live in poverty after 9 years of his taxes, his deficits, and is doubling housing costs. Why is he going ahead with the same wackonomics that caused the poverty in order to solve it?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition talks about affordability, but he's standing against raising taxes on the wealthiest so we can give more supports to those who actually need it. He's standing against our school food program, which is going to help 400,000 kids across the country have fuller bellies as they study, and take the pressure off about $800 a year for families who are pressed with the cost of groceries. We're continuing to deliver dental care supports to seniors, and as of next week, to young people and Canadians with disabilities. We're there for Canadians. He's voting against it.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
It has been 9 years of this Prime Minister promising trickle-down economics, that if he just takes money away from small businesses and workers, it will go from one level of government to another level of government to another level of government. It will trickle down. And now 25% of Canadians are living in poverty, something he tried to cover up, just like he covered up his own data showing $25 billion of extra costs with the carbon tax, nearly $2,000 in carbon tax cover-up for every single family. How can we trust anything he says about taxes, poverty, or money?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition hid for 8 weeks while he was trying to come up with an answer to us asking the wealthiest to pay their fair share so we could invest in fairness for every generation. I think he needs to go back to the drawing board because his answer is completely illogical and unfounded. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to delivering for Canadians struggling with food prices, we've got a national school food program that's going to help 400,000 kids that party is voting against, Mr. Speaker. They talk about affordability, but they're actually only interested in themselves and their political advantage.
The Honourable Member from Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the crime, chaos, cost, or disorder. 66 people died on average while we waited for this Prime Minister to make a decision on BC's request. The government dithered and people died. The government didn't even go as far as it could have in getting rid of its aggressive, radical, and wacko legalization of hard drugs. Why did it take this government so long to reverse its course on legalization, and will it promise never to do it again?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister dealt with that thoroughly earlier in this question period, and we've amended our arrangement with British Columbia. But that member needs to answer a very important question. The Leader of the Opposition has now vowed to have an a la carte Charter of Rights, where today he will decide what rights to have and what rights to not have. What will it be tomorrow, Mr. Speaker? Will it be women's reproductive rights? Will it be the right to a fair trial? Will it be the right to freedom of expression? The notwithstanding charter-ripping policies of this Conservative Party need an answer.
The Honourable Member from Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge.
After 9 years, this Liberal NDP Prime Minister is not worth the crime, chaos, drugs, and disorder. Across British Columbia, there's people strung out on drugs, often comatose or dying. The legalization of fentanyl, meth, and crack has led to a tragic wave of death. The Liberals and NDP are panicking as their poll numbers drop. The public is fed up. Deadly hard drugs will still be able to use with today's announcement. When will this Prime Minister stop tinkering and completely end his wacko drug experiment?
The Honourable Minister for Mental... The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
I thank the Honourable Member for the question, but I must remind him that that question was already answered. And on this side of the House, what we want to emphasize is that a woman's right to choose and charter rights generally are non-negotiable. On this side of the House, we will always protect the Charter of Rights of Freedom. freedoms. We will always stand up for a woman's right to choose, and we ask everybody in this House to vote in favor of contraception for women so they have autonomy over their own bodies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the crime, chaos, drugs and disorder. The Liberal minister responsible for the legislation of hard drugs like fentanyl, meth and crack in British Columbia is still clinging to parts of the Liberals' wacko hard drug legislation experiment. Public open drug use is rampant in our streets. People are even afraid to take their dogs out to walk around their own neighbourhoods. On what day will the Prime Minister completely end this failed radical drug policy?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. Today we said yes to BC's request for an amendment to their pilot project. The pilot program that BC asked the federal government to work with them with compassion, conviction, science and health expertise, Mr. Speaker. BC knows perfectly well, as the advocates and families who are part of this project, that we need to have a public health and public safety approach to this to save lives.
The honourable member from Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that minister is still supporting hard drug legalization, and here's how it's playing out in our communities. A resident from my community just told me about an incident she witnessed at a local clothing store where a man threatened the two ladies working there, screaming, stomping, and overturning displays. I was on the phone the other day with another resident who works at a street front office, and I could barely hear her due to the screaming just outside her window. And yet this minister clings to parts of her wacko legalization policy of fentanyl, meth, and crack. Again, on what day will the Prime Minister completely end this failed drug policy experiment?
Before we continue with the answer from the government health leader, I'm going to ask the honourable member from New Westminster Burnaby please to not comment while members are asking the question. He doesn't have the floor at this time. The honourable government health leader.
Speaker, of course, the Minister and the Prime Minister have dealt with that question, but what is important is to review the past couple of weeks, a very disturbing trend in this country, Mr. Speaker, where the Leader of the Opposition has refused to disavow, to say it's unwelcome to have the support of white supremacists. Then he goes and winks and says, I will make the laws and I will decide what rights exist in this country. What rights is he going to take away? What rights does he intend to take away? Is it women's reproductive rights? Is it the right to freedom of expression? Stand up and tell us what rights you take away.
Colleagues, the amount of time that the Speaker has to spend getting up to asking members who don't have the floor to please not take the floor is almost equivalent to a question. I would like members, please, to make sure that we could have our question period move along quickly, that members please refrain from speaking when the members are asking questions, and that members refrain from speaking when a member is answering questions. L'honorable député, the honourable leader of the opposition.
What this session of Parliament taught us is that after 9 years of this Prime Minister, everything is broken. 25% of Canadians are now living in poverty. 2 million lined up at food banks. 38% more people are homeless. Housing costs have doubled. It wasn't like this before this Prime Minister, and it won't be like this after he's gone. Will he put us through another year and a half of this costly hell, or will he call a carbon tax election today so we can elect a common sense government to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the Leader of the Opposition actually cared more about Canadians than he does about his own political interests, he'd be supporting the 400,000 kids we're going to help with the National School Food Program. He'd be voting in favour, instead of opposing at every turn, the dental care program that has already helped over 200,000 seniors and will now, as of next week, start helping young people and Canadians with disabilities. He'd be standing with us on expanding childcare spaces instead of campaigning against it. But, Mr. Speaker, he doesn't care about Canadians. He cares only about himself.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, these are the same promises that he's been making for 9 years. And instead of the theoretical utopia that he's promised, what Canadians are living through is hell, with tent cities popping up across the country in places they never existed before, with 2 million people lined up in food banks, 1 in 10 Torontonians included in that number, in a town where right now it is impossible for almost anyone to afford a home, and there are 256 tent cities. Why won't he recognize that these are the very real consequence of his policy of wackonomics?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as part of our plan to invest the most ambitious housing plan this country has ever seen, to invest in supports for seniors, supports for young people, supports for Canadians with disabilities, the Conservative leader is choosing to demonstrate what everyone knows Conservative parties do, which is protect the wealthiest and let everyone else fend for themselves. While we are asking the wealthiest Canadians to pay a little bit more by raising the capital gains inclusion rate for anyone making over $250,000 in a given year on selling properties, he's standing with the wealthiest, not with the middle class and people working hard to join it.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the middle class doesn't exist after 9 years of this Prime Minister. Here are the facts. 76% of young people believe they'll never afford a home. 38% more homeless people. 256 homeless encampments in Toronto alone. 2 million people lined up at a food bank. 1 in 4 Canadians skipping meals because they can't afford the price of food. Is this what he meant when he said sunny ways for the middle class?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've seen throughout this session and indeed throughout his career, covering more than 19 years as a parliamentarian, that the leader of the Conservative Party is very quick to use sound bites that use Canadians, that exacerbate and exaggerate and indeed amplify the real concerns people are facing, but he is nowhere on solutions for them. He's standing against dental care, against pharmacare, against investments in the middle class and people working hard to join it, against investments to create jobs and a future for Canadians, because all he cares about is himself and his future.
Remember when our communities were safe? It wasn't that long ago. But then came Justin Trudeau's radical liberalization of crime and drugs. C-75, which allowed for automatic bail so that criminals are released before the paperwork on their arrest is even completed. And in Vancouver, they had to arrest the same 40 offenders 6,000 times in 1 year. That's 150 arrests per offender per year. Those that actually get convicted now get house arrest for their career car theft. So you steal, 50 cars, and what do you get? House arrest. You can sit home and watch Netflix or play Grand Theft Auto. And it's amazing that they're so liberal on crime when they want to ban everything else. They want to ban your plastic straw, but legalize crack in your neighborhood, right? As long as you don't smoke the crack through a plastic straw. For God's sakes. Oh my God. I shouldn't call him wacko, should I? They're going to give me a kick down to the place. All these rules in the House of Commons. I said, where's the funds? WTF. And they thought I was saying something rude. Paul, show them the shirt you've got. That's my Uncle Paul. Check out that shirt. Get one of those at bringithome.ca. Our common sense plan is to repeal catch and release and bring in jail, not bail, for repeat violent offenders. We're going We're going to stop giving out taxpayer-funded and legalized hard drug, and we're going to do what Danielle Smith has done, which is to invest in treatment and recovery to bring our loved ones home drug-free. Thank you, Danielle. Keep up the great work. Thank you. What a great premier you have here in Alberta. God bless you. You know, and then there's the guns, right? So Justin Trudeau wants to ban Grandpa Joe's hunting rifle, but he only inspects, CBSA inspects 1% of shipping containers that come into this country. No wonder that our cars are being stolen and shipped overseas. So here's my common sense plan for that. We're going to have scanners that actually scan what's inside the shipping containers. Right? Can you imagine that? Shocking, eh? So that if the manifest says that inside the shipping containers is some widgets, but the scanner shows that it's a beamer, well, then you take the box, you put it aside, you remove the beamer, you open it up and you look at the VIN, you call the name of the guy who's matched to the VIN, you say, hey, were you planning to send your beamer off to Dubai? No, I wasn't. I just noticed it was missing from the front of my house. Okay, great. Well, you can come get it because it's at the port. And we're going to now call the guy who booked the shipping container. We're going to go to his house and say, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Right? Pretty simple. And you know how we're going to pay for that? You know we're going to pay for it. We're going to forego spending $2 to $7 billion going after law-abiding, licensed, trained, and tested firearms owners. Right now, Trudeau has spent $40 million going after your rifles. He wants to ban your rifles. He hasn't been able to collect a single solitary firearm with this $40 million. He actually asked Canada Post if they would go around communities confiscating people's licensed firearms. And Canada Post said, hell no, we're not doing that. And get this. Then he did this. This is actually sounds like another one of his hallucinations. We have these pest deer on Vancouver Island, apparently on federal land. Have you heard about this? And they need to get rid of these deer. So instead of getting hunters to go and do it for free for the meat, what he's actually done is he's contracted foreign snipers in helicopters to use AR rifles to shoot down at these deer from the sky with the same firearms he wants to ban lawful and licensed owners from owning here in Canada. My friends, we're going to end the war on our hunters. We're going to respect licensed, law-abiding, trained and tested firearms owners and go after the real criminals instead. And we're
Forest Lawn.
After 9 years of this Liberal NDP government, taxes up, costs up, crimes up, time's up. The parliamentary budgeting officer confirmed what Canadians already know. This incompetent finance minister can't do math. She's going to blow through her own deficit this year by $7 billion. That's higher taxes and lower standards of living. 1 in 4 Canadians are already skipping meals, and this Liberal-made misery is only going to get worse. Why not call a carbon tax election now so Conservatives can fix the budget?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I am so glad to hear the Conservatives talk about the PBO, because just a few weeks ago, the PBO did a report on the sustainability of the federal finances. And I'm going to quote what the PBO said, quote, current fiscal policy at the federal level is sustainable over the long term. In fact, according to the PBO, the federal government could even, quote, permanently increase spending by 1.5% of GDP. The only fiscal threat to Canada is Conservatives, who would cut health care, child care, national school fees.
The honourable member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
That PhD in wackonomics has no clue. This incompetent finance minister, not knowing how to do math,
Colleagues, try to encourage as much freedom as possible in terms of the way people express themselves here. I'm going to ask honourable members. To, as much as possible, refrain from using language which is directed at a particular member and is considered insulting to those members. So I'm going to encourage all members, and I've spoken about this in a previous ruling. I'm going to ask the honourable member from Calgary Forest Lawn to start his question again, but to rephrase his question so that he doesn't use that kind of language.
that sounds like Liberal wackonomics. And this incompetent finance minister not knowing how to do math ensured 50% of Canadians can't afford basic necessities like food. She'll give cushy contracts to rich Liberal insiders while telling the 2 million Canadians she sent into a food bank they can solve their Liberal-made misery by cancelling their Disney+. She knows higher deficits lead to higher taxes and lower standards of living. She just doesn't care. Why not call a carbon tax election now so Canadians can fire these economic arsonists?
I'm going to come back to members on this matter, but I'm going to encourage all members.
Nobody pays to see the referee.
I'm going to encourage all members to please keep their counsel when they're not recognized by the chair. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for your remonstrations, but I have to tell you, speaking for myself, puerile playground insults from the maple syrup mega don't bother me one bit.
As I mentioned, order. Order. This is precisely the reason why we should be very mindful of our language, because the things will be said on all sides which is going to be disturbing to the order of the House. I'm going to come back to this matter, and I'm going to ask the Deputy Prime Minister to start her question again without using those words. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, I can handle it. But what makes me really mad, what I can't handle, is seeing crocodile tears from these Conservatives. The only time they care, notice vulnerable Canadians, is for a partisan photo op. And we know they don't care because they are opposed to a national school food program that is feeding 400,000 Canadian kids. They're opposed to dental care that is helping 1 million. We care about Canadians, they just care about themselves.
So the question was about creating a cohabitation. This is the latest Orwellian terminology that the radical, wacko, bloc liberal politicians like Plant and Trudeau are inventing. And what they mean by that is that kids should have to cohabitate with people who are using crack, heroin, cocaine, and other hard drugs in their play parks like this. This is total wacko. Kids should not have to cohabitate with hard drug use and crime. That's not Canada. What it is leading to is more danger and more violence. And by the way, there's an entire industry of bureaucracies and activists and politicians who are profiting from this misery and want to perpetuate it. And they are pumping more and more money into keeping it going. I will end it. My common sense plan will ban the hard drugs. It will put the money into treatment rather than into handing out narcotics. We will break the dependence on drugs, and we will bring our loved ones home drug-free. And let me just close off by quoting a local resident who describes what it's like to have this so-called cohabitation that the wacko radical mayor and prime minister are pushing. This is from Michael Mackenzie, Canadian Research Chair in Child Wellbeing and Professor of Social Work and Pediatrics at the University of McGill. Before the centre opened, community resistance was narrowly focused on the drug injection site. The discussion, sadly now, extends to the entire facility, risking to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is no evidence in the literature I have read that commingling transitional housing with a supervised injection inhalation site is a prudent move in supporting recovery of those newly housed. I make no apologies because that I don't want my children seeing sex acts on the way home from school. I feel no shame in saying it is unacceptable to have people publicly masturbating or assaulting neighbors. Communities, much like the families who comprise them, can be both compassionate and set firm boundaries about unacceptable public behavior that harms people and traumatizes children. It is compassionate to demand more from politicians and the Benoit Laub Centre. That's Michael Mackenzie, Canada Research Chair in Child Wellbeing and Professor of Social Work and Pediatrics at the University of McGill. That sounds like common sense to me.
Well, good morning, everyone. As we all know, the Liberal government is holding its caucus retreat here over the next few days. This is after 9 years of Liberal policies causing untold misery to Canadians in so many ways. This is their ninth year of imposing Justin Trudeau's radical and wacko agenda on Canadians. They spent over $1.3 million over the years having these types of retreats, and it's all been the same results. Spoiler alert, the same thing's going to happen this week. They're not actually going to come up with any solutions to solve the problems facing Canadians. All they will do is double down on the same failed policies that have caused so much hardship. Let's go through what that hardship looks like. Justin Trudeau's inflationary deficit spending has eroded the power of workers' paychecks, meaning that so many Canadians are falling further and further behind, making difficult choices like whether or not to put food on the table or heat their homes. Stories of mothers watering down milk, seniors skipping meals. That is the reality in Canada after 9 years of Justin Trudeau. Millions of Canadians visiting the food bank, many of them for the very first time in their lives. People with jobs being forced to go to food banks because they literally can't afford to put food on the table. That's after Justin Trudeau's inflationary crisis has eroded the purchasing power of people's paychecks and savings. It's also after his carbon tax has driven up the price of everything. And remember, Justin Trudeau isn't just satisfied with the carbon tax where it is today. His plan is to quadruple the carbon tax. Today, the Canadian Trucking Association put out shocking stats showing that Trudeau's carbon tax cost the economy, just the trucking industry, $2 billion. And that will rise to $4 billion by 2030. That's $4 billion of transportation costs being dumped onto consumers. That means literally anything that has to be shipped into Canada, trucked from one part of the country to another, costs more because of Justin Trudeau's carbon tax. And that's going to go up year after year after year. Our communities aren't just less safe. People are living in fear. Violent crime is up across the board after Justin Trudeau's decision to implement a catch and release policy for bail. We hear this from police associations from coast to coast in every province and almost every city, that the crime wave terrorizing Canadian communities is a direct result of Justin Trudeau's changes to Canada's bail system, making it easier for dangerous and repeat offenders to get back on the street, often the very same day that they're arrested in the first place, only to reoffend. Housing has driven so many Canadians out of their homes. There was a RE/MAX report this week that showed that 14%, 1 out of every 7 mortgage holders in Canada, believe that they will have to sell their home because they won't be able to afford their mortgage renewal. This is a direct result of Justin Trudeau's policies. The Bank of Canada raised interest rates to fight the inflation that Trudeau caused, and now mortgage holders, when they go to renew, are renewing at 2, 3, 5 times the rates that they were able to secure just a few short years ago. Housing costs have pushed people out of their homes. There's a tragic story just the other day of a senior in her 70s being forced to live in a tent because she couldn't afford the rent anymore. This is in Canada after 9 years of Justin Trudeau's government. The hardship is real. The decline in the quality of life for so many Canadians is drastic and stark. And that is not because of factors beyond Justin Trudeau's control or the Liberal Party's control. That is a direct result of their policies. And all they are offering is to double down more and more with the same types of extremist policies that caused this crisis in the first place. Now, we all know the Liberals are in a little bit of turmoil. And my message to Canadians is this: it doesn't matter who is leading the Liberal Party, because this is what they all believe in. We know that Mark Carbon Tax Carney is speaking to the caucus this week. He loves the carbon tax. He said it has served its purpose. Well, if by that he means he likes the fact that Canadians can no longer afford to fill their fridges and put food on the table, then he has to explain that to Canadians. Every single Liberal cabinet minister, every single Liberal MP voted time and time again to raise the carbon tax, to borrow billions more, to keep pushing inflation and keeping it high, and interest rates along with it. It doesn't matter what kind of paint they slap on the Liberal brand or who they're speculating might lead them into the next election. Liberal policies, 9 years of Liberal policies have done this. Mark Carney won't change that direction. Any other Liberal cabinet minister or MP won't change that direction. They all agree with it. They all support those high tax, high spending, high borrowing, inflationary policies. They all support the same policies that unleashed crime and chaos and hard drugs as well. Let's take a look at the Liberal Party and their unexplainable devotion to the idea of providing hard drugs to people who are suffering from addiction. They all support that. They voted time and time again to do it. They supported their government's implementation of a plan that legalized the use of hard drugs in public places like playgrounds and bus stops and even in hospitals, to the point where one union told their nurses that they should avoid breastfeeding if they've been walking through rooms where people have been consuming hard drugs in hospitals. This is 9 years of Liberal policy, and Canadians can only expect more of the same. Justin Trudeau hasn't changed course. The Liberal Party hasn't changed course. Mark Carney isn't promising to change course. All they're talking about is doubling down on the same failed policies that caused all this heartache to Canadians in the first place. So that's my message to Canadians today. It doesn't matter what happens at this retreat. It doesn't matter what kinds of comms exercise they go through or what kind of speculation they all entertain about who might lead them in the next election. It's the same failed Liberal policies causing the same hardships for Canadians, pushing so many Canadians out of their homes and so many Canadians to the food bank.
Mr. Chair,
the contrast, I'll take questions in a moment. The contrast is clear. Only the common sense Conservative Party is offering relief from all this hardship. We're going to axe the tax to bring down prices so that you can afford to eat and heat your home. We're going to fix the budget so that prices can stabilize and interest rates can come down so you can stay in your home. We're going to build the homes by rewarding communities that get new homes built and ensuring that those who don't aren't continually funded year after year after getting poor results. And we're going to stop the crime by taking dangerous and repeat offenders off the street, ending Justin Trudeau's taxpayer-funded experiment with hard drugs in our communities, and once again get Canada back on track and improve the life of all Canadians. Thanks very much.
A 17-year-old beautiful girl from London killed by someone who had already been arrested, but for reasons I don't understand, was released to carry out domestic violence on her again. She is just the latest victim of the radical NDP wacko catch and release justice system, or I should say injustice system. It allows the same repeat violent offenders to go free again and again. Justin Trudeau and the NDP told you all that it would work, that all the so-called experts agreed that freeing criminals onto the street 50, 60, 70 times within hours of their latest arrest would somehow make us all safer. Most Canadians thought it was wacko, and they were right. Today, the data is out from Stats Canada. Data released moments ago show that violent crime is up 50% after 9 years of Trudeau and the NDP Liberals. Homicides up 28%. Sexual assaults 75% higher. Violent firearm offenses up 116%, more than double. Extortion up 357%, as small business owners get letters telling them that if they don't pay $1 million, there'll be a bullet flying through their 6-year-old daughter or son's bedroom window in the middle of the night. That's what's happening on our streets. Auto theft up 46%. This is the direct result of NDP Liberal catch and release policies that turn the same repeat offenders loose on our streets again and again and again. Just last week, we saw a story of 18 offenders charged with 150 crimes. 9 of them were already out on some sort of early release, and since their arrest, 6 of them have been released again. And what do you know? They're out doing more and more crime. A very tiny group of criminals doing all the crime. Even the Justice Minister has had his car stolen 3 times. Incredible. You'd think the criminals would be somewhat grateful that he keeps releasing them. But no, they steal his car too, and he is too dense to figure out that they should be locked up. This is the same guy who said that crime wasn't rising, it was just a perception. He said that Canadians were just believing crazy conspiracy theories about crime, and that the smart people who stare at screens and look at spreadsheets knew better. Well, now the spreadsheets are out, and they confirm that catch and release, wacko, NDP Liberal policies have caused one of the worst crime waves in Canadian history. Look at the firearms issue. Remember they told us if they banned hunters and sport shooters who are licensed, law-abiding, trained, and tested, that those people that all of a sudden we wouldn't have gun crime? Well, here we are, more crime. Why? It turns out that hunters are not the problem, nor are licensed sport shooters. They've already been trained and tested. They've had all of their backgrounds checked, and they're daily checked on the police database system. Right? Those people don't commit crime. I want to protect Canadians from criminals, while Trudeau and the NDP want to protect turkeys from hunters. You decide which makes more sense to you. We see the chaos here in London with tent cities popping up everywhere. Now, this is obviously partly the result of the NDP Liberals doubling your housing costs, but also they're giving out drugs, taxpayer-funded opioids that are ending up in the hands of kids, despite the lies of those who are in the system who are profiting from it, are making the drug problem even worse. And now we learn that the NDP Liberal government had a secret document planning national decriminalization. They tried to keep it under wraps until after the next election, hoping Canadians would not find out. But Blacklock's reporter got their hands on the document, and it showed a secret scheme to legalize crack, heroin, cocaine, and other hard drugs which, if Trudeau and the NDP are re-elected, will be as easy to get in your neighborhood as a candy bar at a corner store. This is reality, my friends. After 9 years of Trudeau and the NDP Liberals, everything is broken. Canadians are broke, and NDP Liberals are not worth the crime, chaos, cost, and corruption.
Member for Lakeland.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost to Canada. The worst decline in living standards in 4 decades, the worst drop in income per person in the G7, the worst economic growth in the OECD. What's their wacko plan now? Slap a job-killing oil and gas cap on Canada, make everything even more expensive, and drive out jobs, businesses, money, tech, and talent. Over 450 billion Canadian dollars have fled Canada, fled them to the U.S. When will the Liberals stop fueling the U.S. and help Canadians instead?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker. Let's talk about GDP per capita over time in Canada. Between 2006 and 2016, Canada's GDP per capita under Harper grew from $40,504 to $42,134. That's about $1,800 over 10 years. Under this Liberal government, it's grown from $42,000 a year to $53,372 in 2023. That's by more than $11,000. So Conservatives, you don't need to pull out your calculators. $11,000 is more than $1,800.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Keep telling Canadians they've never had it so good. The truth is these NDP Liberals hurt Canadians every time, but help the U.S. and hostile regimes. It's nuts since so many countries want Canada's energy. Ukraine, Germany, Poland, Japan, South Korea, Greece, and Latvia all ask for LNG, but these NDP Liberals say no. 1 million Canadians need powerful paychecks from oil and gas jobs, but 9 years of killed pipelines, energy tax hikes, and oil and gas cap sends jobs and monies to the U.S., Canada's top ally and competitor. Why do the NDP Liberals send Canada's jobs to the U.S. and make Canadian workers suffer?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We're working on the challenges that Canadians face with real solutions. At that time, inflation is down, interest rates are down, unemployment rates are down, and greenhouse gas pollution rates are down as well. And despite what these climate change denying Conservatives say, CO2 isn't plant food. That absurd Conservative claim that reducing our carbon emissions would somehow be bad for crop growth is straight up anti-science, disinformation, and climate denialism. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. We learned that in elementary school. The oil sands are Canada's largest source of industrial carbon emissions, and our pollution cap asks them to invest some of their astonishing $60 billion in profits in innovating and making sure that Canadians can afford green, affordable.
The honourable member Calgary Centre.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal government has shown again they are not worth the cost. This week, the government announced a new policy, a cap on the Canadian economy. Since 2015, the United States has increased oil and gas production by 40%, much more than Canada. The world needs Canadian oil and gas. With the incoming U.S. administration promising to unleash American energy, this government has announced a cap on the economy, costing Canada 150,000 jobs. How can they justify this economic vandalism?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The pollution cap will ensure our energy sector can increase its production while decreasing its emissions. Countries around the world are looking at Canada for less polluting energy. If we want our energy to stay competitive, we must lower our emissions. The pollution cap will provide long-term competitiveness in Canadian energy so we can keep being an energy superpower for the world. Under the do-nothing approach that the previous Conservative government approached, Canada's imports of foreign oil were 2 times higher. They failed to promote Canadian energy. Madam Speaker, I would be happy to offer the Conservative leader and his party a briefing on this climate change.
The honourable member Calgary Centre.
Well, let me quote Canada's destructive environment minister. Look around the world. No other oil and gas producer is doing what we're doing. And one could wonder why. Or why he ignored the warnings of the economic destruction his Canadian energy cap would cause when it offers no environmental benefit. Any reduction in Canada will automatically be met by other producers around the world. The minister's announcement is nothing but performative. Will the Prime Minister get serious about actual solutions and fire this environment minister?
L'honorable Secrétaire Parlementaire.
Madam Speaker, it's no wonder that the Conservatives aren't talking about the economy today. It's because yesterday Statistics Canada raised their numbers. In fact, they revised growth in Canada upwards. And you know why? Madam Speaker, it's because business investment is streaming into Canada. Investors are looking to Canada because we offer stability and certainty, and that's translating into growth and into higher paychecks for Canadians.
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister was so excited about the new U.S. President that he sent him a gift. Thousands of Canadian jobs, millions of Canadian investment dollars. This Liberal government's carbon tax and failure to stand up for Canada has created an exodus of capital from Canada to the United States. This Prime Minister's policy has created a made-in-Canada per capita Canada GDP recession. While American workers are thriving, Canadians can barely afford food and rent. Will this Prime Minister stop sabotaging the Canadian economies and axe this self-imposed tariff?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry.
Conservatives seem so intent, Madam Speaker, on talking down the Canadian economy. They don't seem to be able to recognize the positive signs of economic progress and recovery. Inflation is down to 1.6% in Canada. Our central bank has decreased interest rates 4 times. We've attracted over $50 billion in foreign direct investment, propelling us to #1 per capita in the G20. That's led to tens of thousands of good-paying jobs in this country. Jobs that are projected to grow in the clean economy to over 400,000 by 2030. Those are real opportunities that pay the bills, unlike Conservative cuts.
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Madam Speaker, these Liberals keep telling Canadians at food banks they've never had it so good. Well, here's the facts. The Economist magazine says that Canada is now poorer than Alabama, the 4th poorest state in the United States. Further, over the past 5 years, America's economic growth has outstripped Canada's by nearly double. Simple question. When will Canadians get an opportunity to vote for common sense Conservatives so that we can turn their hurt into hope and restore the promise of Canada?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, we responded to the needs of Canadians. That's why we brought in programs like the Canada Child Benefit, because we know that Canadian families need extra help right now. But what did the Conservatives do, Madam Speaker? They said, don't send those checks to Canadians. They said, cut those programs, Madam Speaker. When they talk about their crocodile tears for Canadians, they're not actually doing anything to help. Madam Speaker, we know Canadians are struggling, and that's why we've responded with programs that actually help them. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, last week the health minister went into a wacko rant accusing parents who take their kids on a road trip of locking them up in a car for 10 days straight without a washroom break, causing the whole world to burn. Unbelievable. All because we proposed that the government take taxes off gas so that Canadians could have a summer break. Will this health minister break into the same hysteria over his boss's use of a gas-guzzling private jet to vacation all around the world?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, we face an existential crisis in climate change. The Conservative solution, you'd have to drive. I was wrong, and I admit it. It wasn't 37,000 kilometers. It was 44,000 kilometers to get the benefit that they're talking about. And what they want to do is cut not only dental care, not only cut child care, not only cut pharmacare, but end our climate action and return to the days when the Conservative Party would go into climate conferences and attack the action the world was taking to save our planet. I will stand for climate change, and so will this party, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, his wacko math gets even worse. He's talking about vacations of 44,000 kilometers. Those are the vacations his boss takes in a taxpayer-funded, fuel-guzzling private jet. The vacations for which Conservatives want to give Canadians a break is to a local campground where they can support the local economy. We know Canadians can't go abroad. All they can do is get in their small vehicle and have a small break. Why won't the government take the tax off so that they can afford to do that?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, it seems that we have in fact underestimated the wacko math of the Conservative Party of Canada. According to Sarah Hastings-Simon, an associate professor at the University of Calgary of Faculty of Science, and she crunched the numbers, the alleged numbers of the Conservative Party based on the savings, and her calculation, someone would have to drive 44,000 kilometers, not 37,000 kilometers, Mr. Speaker. 44, so you could in fact drive from the North Pole to the South Pole and back, and you would have some kilometers left. These are the type of mathematics that these people are doing, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, if that particular minister had his way, Canadians wouldn't even be allowed to drive to the grocery store because he wants to abolish roads. He says we should not fund any more roads and then has the audacity to call other people wacko. Most Canadians don't want to put on an orange jumpsuit or climb a building. They just want to take their kids for a merciful break from this miserable, broken economy. So will the government accept our common sense plan to take the tax off gas and diesel so Canadians can have a summer?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
You can't, in fact, drive from the North Pole to the South Pole. There are no roads. I'm sure they'll find ways to blame me for that. Leave alone the fact that there are two oceans. But if you were to drive from Canada's most northern city, accessible by road, Tuktoyaktuk in the Northwest Territories, and then you drove to the most southern city, accessible by road, Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, you would have to drive 16,000 kilometers at an average speed of 100 kilometers an hour without stopping. It would be 60 hours, Mr. Speaker, and you're only halfway to the savings claimed by the Conservative Party of Canada.
Madam Speaker, as I begin my comments here tonight, I want to share a note, and a sad note that I got from a constituent of mine only a couple months ago. Daniel Paul had written me, sadly with the news that his father, Gordy, 65 years old, a resident of Cornwall, SD&G area, was scheduled to come into my office a couple months ago for some help. Unfortunately, before he was able to fulfill that appointment, Daniel let me know that tragically his father took his life. I want to share an email that I exchanged with Daniel when he had reached out. And he asked and said, Eric, I would really appreciate it if you could share his story to highlight the absolute crisis we are facing in this country. This would greatly help our family heal if his story could be used to shed light on the countless others still suffering today from affordability. Daniel, I want to give my condolences here on the floor of the House, as I said I would do, to you, to your wife Amber, and to your 5-year-old daughter Sophie. You've lost your father, father-in-law, and grandfather in circumstances that I can only imagine have been extremely difficult for you. It's important, Madam Speaker, and why I wanted to do this for Daniel and their family, is to let them know that there are members. At the end of the day in this House, there are members every day that are working to help those who are suffering, whether it be the affordability crisis we face, the mental health crisis we face, and getting, I think, optimism and hope for Canadians. So Daniel, I want to keep my word as I have, give my condolences to you and your family, and continue to fight the good fight in your father's memory. Madam Speaker, I had the opportunity a couple weeks ago to ask a question about the radical drug policy this Prime Minister and the NDP in British Columbia, with the support of the NDP, of course, here in Ottawa, propping up this Prime Minister, when it came to the decriminalization, frankly, the legalization of using hard drugs in public spaces in British Columbia. It was this Prime Minister's judgment and the coalition partners that for years they could have rejected the pitch from the BC government on this aspect, but instead they approved it. And finally, after the pleas of the BC NDP government, which just happens to be facing an election later this year, and more importantly, the horror stories that have been emerging from every part of the province about the disaster the Prime Minister's decision was to exempt from the criminal code use of hard drugs like crack and meth, fentanyl and opioids in public spaces. I want not just to use the words that I've shared here to date, but I want to share from news articles. It was the CBC, of all things, of all media, that covered on April 15th when the Vancouver Deputy Police Chief Fiona Wilson testified here at the House of Commons Health Committee about how that pilot and how that our Prime Minister's decision to decriminalize and allow hard drugs in public spaces, she said, quote, "It is limiting police response to problematic public drug use, including inside hospitals and at bus stops." Quote, "In the wake of decriminalization, there are many of those locations where we have absolutely no authority to address that problematic drug use because the person appears to be in possession of less than 2.5 grams. And she goes on to give a startling example. So if you have someone who is with their family at the beach and there's a person next to them smoking crack cocaine, it's not a police matter. What extremely poor judgment on the part of this Prime Minister to agree to the BC NDP request, just as complicit as they are on this out-of-touch wacko policy, as we've mentioned before.
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The overdose crisis is one of the most serious and unprecedented public health threats in Canada's recent history, and it is impacting communities across the country. Our hearts go out to the individuals, families and friends affected by this public health crisis. Dans le cadre de son approche,
As part of its comprehensive approach, our government continues to support efforts to divert people who use drugs away from the criminal justice system and towards health and social services. This approach reduces immediate harm and helps people find appropriate support, including treatment and recovery, while ensuring the safety of our communities. We amended the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act to encourage police and prosecutors to consider alternatives to charging and prosecuting individuals for drug possession offenses.
Mean that individuals can avoid being criminalized and get the help they need to address underlying issues. This strategy encourages a public health approach while making sure police have the discretion to move forward with criminal offenses when there are risks to public safety. Furthermore, in August 2020, guidelines issued by the Public Prosecution Service of Canada directing prosecutors to consider alternatives to prosecution for the personal possession of drugs, except in the most serious cases where public safety concerns arise. In 2021, the Government of British Columbia requested the launch of decriminalization pilot project to help address the overdose crisis in the province. BC has asked that we make amendments to its project, and we have granted BC's request to prohibit possession of controlled substances in public spaces. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their communities. Law enforcement also needs to have the tools necessary to address issues of public safety while continuing to take a compassionate and public health approach. From the outset, we've been clear. BC's exemption could and would be adjusted if needed. We will continue to work together and respond to what is actually working on the ground. We will continue working hand in hand with all of our partners, including provincial jurisdictions, law enforcement, Indigenous communities, people with lived and living experience, and municipalities across this country every step of the way. Il n'y a pas de solution unique.
There is no one-size-fits-all solution to this crisis, and it requires a global response. We're working to ensure that Canadians have access to a full range of support strategies to help people access prevention, harm reduction, treatment, and recovery services, the services and supports they need, when and where they need them. It's not one or the other, nor one against the other. We need a full continuum of care. Last week, I participated in the Health Commission's travelling study on the overdose crisis. All parties were represented, except the Conservatives. They were only there for half a day. Well, because the Conservatives refuse to look at the evidence, they lash out with their ideological approach. Budget 2024 announced $150 million over 3 years to help municipalities and Indigenous communities quickly access funds to mobilize efforts and meet their urgent needs to reduce harm and save lives now.
The government remains committed to addressing substance use and addiction as a health issue. All partners must work together.
The honourable member for Stormont Dundas South Glengarry.
And it gets bad in hospitals. It's the BC Nurses Union that confirmed, was the president, where she said the maternity ward of the Victoria General Hospital is now equipped with a special device to detect harmful particulate matter such as smokable drugs. A light goes off to warn healthcare staff that potentially harmful substances are in the air so they can wear a respirator for protection. That's what happens when this Prime Minister and the NDP and Liberals got together for their radical drug decriminalization plan. My question, my follow-up question, the key is here. Will the Liberals and the NDP support our Safe Hospitals Act, our common sense conservative plan to make sure these types of experiments will never be allowed in hospitals again, to protect our healthcare workers, and most importantly, a second important key part the government did not address in that first part is, will they rule out ever expanding this type of failed experiment anywhere else in this country? Yes or no?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And we'll continue to work with British Columbia, the other provinces and territories, and all our partners to meet their specific needs and to support public health and public safety.
Enforcement partners have been clear. They do not want to arrest people for personal drug possession, but rather they want the necessary tools to address issues of public safety. They support a comprehensive public health approach to addressing substance use harms, where they can redirect someone away from the criminal justice system to available and accessible health and social services. L'approche de notre gouvernement.
Our government's approach to dealing with this crisis is collaborative and comprehensive. It includes measures that are innovative and which are necessary to save lives, follow up, and make the necessary adjustments.
Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much for recognizing me. I am rising to contribute to the point of order raised by the NDP House Leader on April 30th and May 1st, to which the Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader made a significant addition on May 8th. At its heart, the point of order is, I believe, an effort to censor and silence the fallout from the controversial events which happened during the question period on April 30th, an event which none of us will forget anytime soon. The honourable member for Lethbridge was called to order about comments concerning the chair. She withdrew those comments, but yet was named by the chair and kicked out for the day. Her withdrawal of her comments, which was recorded in the Blues, never made it into the day's debates. That's an important distinction, because the Blues are the temporary recording and transcript of what happened in the House, but what actually gets published and permanently put up on the parliamentary website and indeed printed are the debates. So that withdrawal was in the Blues, but somehow never made it into the permanent record. And the chair is currently seized with a question of privilege concerning that alarming editing of our records to align with the Speaker's conduct. Then, the Prime Minister referred to the Leader of the Opposition of having, quote, spineless leadership. Though the Speaker may have chided the Prime Minister, he was neither sanctioned nor disciplined. Immediately after, however, the Leader of the Opposition's next question also offered strong language. Yet the Speaker applied a different standard to the Conservative Party's Leader than he did to the Liberal Party's Leader. As a result, the Leader of the Opposition was also named and banished from the House for the day. Conservatives left the House for the balance of question period, as you might understand, after our leader had been incredibly ordered to stop questioning the Prime Minister about British Columbia's disastrous drug decriminalization experience and leave the chamber. Nonetheless, I am not here to litigate that matter. The main substance of the point of order now before the chair lies in tweets which many members of the Conservative caucus published in those minutes immediately following that shocking decision to name the Leader of the Opposition and expel him from the House in the middle of question period. The NDP Liberal coalition spokespersons on this matter have each suggested that various Conservative MPs must, quote, withdraw their tweets, which I assume means deleting the tweets, and apologize before returning to the House. In other words, they would prefer that Conservatives just stay silent and not draw any public attention to how this House is operating during these days of an NDP Liberal coalition governing Canada. As I mentioned, those members raised this as a point of order. As you would know, points of order concern House proceedings and irregularity in procedures. It is also well established that statements made outside the House do not fall within the Speaker's purview to maintain order here, under points of order, within the chamber, in ensuring House proceedings run smoothly. I would refer the Chair to page 620 of House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 3rd edition, which says quite clearly, quote, "The Speaker has no authority to rule on statements made outside the House by one member against another," end quote. In fact, this point was made by the Assistant Deputy Speaker on April 30th, when the NDP House Leader first raised the point of order, saying at page 22.816 of the debates, quote, "The other aspect that was brought to the attention of the Speaker was the fact that statements are being made outside of the House by a member. The Speaker has no authority to rule on that, as the Honourable Member has indicated. Several of your predecessors have been invited to weigh in on statements made by members outside the walls of the chamber. In one of the earliest rulings concerning tweets, Mr. Speaker Milliken held at page 1284 of the debates for April 1st, 2010, quote, "It is clearly impossible for the Chair to police the use of personal digital devices by members, for example, by trying to distinguish whether certain texting has originated from the chamber or not. Nor would the Chair want to change its long-standing practice of refraining from comment on statements made outside the House," end quote. In any event, as you will recall, Conservative MPs exited the chamber after the Leader of the Opposition was named, so they had tweeted from outside of the House. Moreover, since the Leader and the Honourable Member for Lethbridge had been named, their subsequent tweets, which were among those of concern in the point of order, simply could not have been published from inside the chamber. Turning back to the precedents on point, one of your more recent predecessors, Mr. Speaker Regan, said on November 20th, 2017, at page 15303 of the debates, quote, "The Chair's role is very limited to the review of the statements made in a proceeding of Parliament. In other words, the Chair cannot comment on what transpires outside of the deliberations of the House or its committee," end quote. He expanded upon this point in his October 30th, 2018 ruling at page 23033 of the debates, quote, "As a result, the Speaker cannot be officially apprised of anything said to have transpired outside the walls of this place," end quote. Another of your predecessors explained the underlying principle for this approach on February 9th, 2012, at page 5096 of the debates, quote, "We know that outside the chamber, when a member or anyone may say something that would offend or call into question someone's character, there are remedies that are not available inside the chamber. That is usually why the authority of the Speaker does not extend outside the chamber for things that are said," end quote. In sum, Mr. Speaker, I would urge you to heed the well-trodden ground of your predecessors and find that members' comments made outside of the House, including tweets, simply do not come within your jurisdiction to maintain order within the chamber. So a point of order raised on this very question simply is not under the Speaker's purview. Before concluding, there is one final point I would like to add, because I know the Chair is seized with a couple of different aspects of the events of April 30th. In a May 1st Canadian Press article on the opposition leader's naming, one might read this passage, quote, "A spokesman for the Speaker said Wednesday that the Speaker didn't just single out the Leader of the Opposition, noting he also asked the Prime Minister to reframe one of his questions after he called the member for Carleton a, quote, spineless leader. The Prime Minister reframed his answer," Matthew Gravel said, Matthew Gravel being the spokesman for the Speaker. That is a direct quote. The Prime Minister reframed his answer. The quote goes on, quote, "The Speaker offered the Leader of the Opposition 4 opportunities to withdraw his comment and reframe his question. The Conservative Leader did not avail himself of those opportunities." So that is the Speaker's spokesman speaking on behalf of the Speaker publicly to the media on events that happened in the chamber. Let me read the Hansard from that day. We have the first interaction with the Speaker saying, "I am going to ask 2 things. The first is that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition withdraw that term which is not considered parliamentary." The opposition leader then said, "Mr. Speaker, I replace wacko with extremist." The Speaker got up again and said, "I'm going to ask the Leader of the Opposition once again to simply withdraw that comment, please. Mr. Speaker, I will replace it with radical," from the Leader of the Opposition. The Speaker then goes on to say, "I'm going to ask the Leader of the Opposition one last time to simply withdraw that comment, please." Here's the key phrase that comes next. The Leader of the Opposition said, "Mr. Speaker, I simply withdraw it and replace it with the aforementioned adjective." So here we have the spokesman for the Speaker saying, the Prime Minister reframed his answer as an excuse for why the Prime Minister did not face any sanction. The spokesman for the Speaker says the Speaker offered 4 opportunities to withdraw his comments and reframe his question. The Leader of the Opposition did not avail himself of those opportunities. You just heard me say it, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition absolutely did withdraw it and reframe it, exactly as the Speaker's spokesman said publicly in the media, in a way to suggest that it didn't happen, actually happened. If you look at the video of those days' events and the Hansard that is printed. So if it is fair game for the Speaker, through his spokesman, to comment outside of the chamber on House proceedings with what I would submit is an incorrect and inaccurate spin, then it can only be equally fair for other members to make their own comments outside of the chamber about what happened during this unprecedented sequence of events. Of course, Mr. Speaker, I trust that any ruling on this current point of order from the NDP Liberal coalition would not result in double standards being created or extended. Thank you very much.
Thank the honourable member for the intervention. Of course, Chair will take it under advisement and come back to the House as soon as possible.